Let's Talk with Anna Glowinski.
We're going to go into the evidence and the interest of a murder that happened around about 50 years ago. Judith Roberts was just 14 when she took off on a bike ride near her home and basically never came back. Her body was then discovered 3 days later. A huge manhunt ensued, and then there was obviously the look for who did it. And all that happened after that was a hugely complex story involving many people and perhaps the wrong people as well. Authors Chris Clark and Tanita Matthews have written a book all about it, investigating what they think could have been true, what could have been false, and what happened at the time. It's called The Murder of Judith Roberts, and I've got both Chris and I've got Tanita with me on the line, and she's going to be talking us through everything about the book. So good morning. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you? I think we've got Chris as well coming in.
Oh, fantastic. So we've got the dynamic duo. But Tanita, if you could just take the lead for the minute here and just tell us a little bit about the two of you, how you came together and why you decided to write this book.
Well, Chris and I actually kind of met about 7-8 years ago now, when I was writing for a true crime magazine. And Chris had written an excellent book with a British author named Tim Tate. And I had interviewed both Chris and Tim about this book. The book is Yorkshire Ripper, The Secret Murders, in which Chris and Tim did a lot of work looking at the unattributed murders to Peter Sutcliffe. And Chris and I became kind of firm friends, as did Tim and I actually, after this interview. And ever since, Chris and I have kept in touch and always talked about writing a book together. And he was actually the one who brought Judith's story to me and said, this is something that we should look at further. What do you think? And the rest, as they say, is history.
Chris, what was it about this story that you thought, yes, this is the one that I really want to dig deep into? This is the book for us.
Primarily the miscarriage of justice to Andrew Evans. Back in 2015, after publication of The Secret Murders, I found 3 appeal files in the National Archives, and I realised the extent that Andrew had been interrogated and falsely embroiled in this murder inquiry. I also realised the pathologist in the case, how much involved he was with the police rather than being independent. So that biased the case very, very towards the Birmingham Crown Court. It had a major influence on the case.
So you'd say that this story for you was one that almost was led by a moral sense of justice. You know, you had to get that story out there to give a voice to somebody who hadn't been given one before.
Exactly. We'd already covered Judith's case, albeit, as a sub-chapter, but it was the extent of the interrogation and the injustice to Andrew, and that they weren't seeking anyone else in the inquiry, when it was clearly evident from witnesses that Judith was followed on the day in question by a man in a grey car.
And before we go into any more sort of the details of the actual case, I'm just curious as to what you guys see your role as sort of authors and writers in the grander scheme of justice. And, do you feel very much so that we can't just, as public, just sit back and rely on our justice system in the UK? And what is it that you guys have to bring to crime and to cases like this, maybe more modern ones or historical ones as it is, as it were, to give it like a different perspective? What is your role in that bigger picture?
Well, from my point of view, it's twofold. It's for justice for very many unsolved victims of crime, and the other one is a number of miscarriages of justice to vulnerable young men.
Fantastic. And Tanita, I just wondered if you had sort of your own opinion on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I think really as an author, as a filmmaker, and the responsibility that comes with that is holding up the truth to people for them to look at. And I think the fact that Judith's case 53 years on is still unsolved. The sad thing is it seems to have been forgotten about, and it really shouldn't be, because as Chris said, there was only ever one person in the limelight as far as who was responsible for Judith's murder, and it seems that they got it so terribly wrong. And actually, for that to still not be rectified all these years later is still contributing to that miscarriage of justice, for Judith's family, for her loved ones, for those who remember her. And so I think really for us, it is about holding up the facts in an unbiased way, although we have our theories, and saying this is what we think. This is what we think. Here are the facts. What do you think? And starting that conversation, because really that's what is important, is to keep Judith front and centre.
And I mean, obviously we're talking about a young girl who was killed, who, if she was still alive today, should be an elderly lady now, should have had all that life lived behind her. It is tragic to think about. But I also wonder, were you able to speak to many people who remembered her or who were involved in this case because it was so long ago?
There was a great amount of difficulty in getting hold of. So the police officers who were involved have all unfortunately passed on. There were some that were still around that we spoke with who would have been in the early days of their careers. But there were definitely people who still remembered Judith. There was one lady we spoke with, and her wedding day was supposed to happen on the day that Judith was found, and the hall that she had hired out for her reception became the inquiry room. So she remembers that quite abruptly, in that's how the day unfolded. But nobody has forgotten Judith. That was very much clear from the research we did.
I mean, that's good in its way, I suppose, that, her memory is still being remembered and being treasured. And so what about the actual case itself then, and the young lad who got sent to prison for this? Can you just tell us a little bit about him, why he got dragged into this, and how it ended up going so terribly wrong for him?
Well, basically, Andrew was a misfit, vulnerable, asthmatic. He was a former soldier at nearby barracks about 4 miles away, and it started on house-to-house inquiries. All of the soldiers in the barracks who were there at the time had to fill in a pro forma as to where they were and who could support that for them. It was just a routine. And then 4 months into the inquiry, 2 detectives visited Andrew to firm up the alibi that he provided, that he was actually in the barracks with 2 other soldiers. They dug deeper into it, and he became quite worried. And that night, he said he had a dream where he saw Judith's face. And the next day he went into Longton police station, presented himself and demanded to see a photo of Judith to firm up the information that he'd had as a dream. From there, his feet didn't touch the ground. He found himself embroiled in a judge's rules fabrication, whereby he wasn't cautioned, he wasn't told he was under arrest, he was interviewed, interrogated and bullied over a 2-day period, at the end of which he was charged with Judith's murder. He was even taken through the crime scene that he hadn't walked before, and they did pseudo photos of him pointing out the route he would have made from the barracks to the crime scene. And that was later presented to the jury, which again influenced the jury, that the photographs were Andrew showing the route he walked to the crime scene, not what the police were doing. It's totally irresponsible to take a suspect to a crime scene, and then it gave him a false memory.
And why do you think that the police were so keen to pin it on him?
Well, basically, they hadn't got anyone else in the frame, and they were under pressure to get a result. And that seemed to be the culture of the day. I mean, I've dealt with a number of similar miscarriages of justice, both in writing and support level. So that seemed to be life on Mars type of policing of the time, even though I was a police officer and never experienced the same.
I think, it's worth mentioning that previously, or just prior to Judith's murder, there had been local police forces who had been dealing with other serious murders in which they'd been under a lot of pressure to solve very quickly. And I think the memory of just how difficult that had been for them may have influenced their decision in how quick they acted, because they had Andrew effectively saying, I did it, which is, as a police officer, something that you have to take very, very seriously. But I think the public attention that was on this case, because Judith was a child, because she was so young, because it was so ferocious, I think the police were under a great deal of pressure from the outside world to make sure that they had somebody, and somebody quickly, so that they couldn't do this again.
It almost seems like he made their job very easy for them, even though he didn't necessarily get the right answer. He was sort of giving it to them on a plate, and they ran with that. At what point did somebody question, because wasn't he in prison then for 20 years? At what point did evidence start coming out again? Did people start revisiting the case and saying, hang on, there's something not right here? Or was it one of those stories that always had a question mark over it?
Well, in Andrew's case, he had shared a prison cell with an activist of Greenpeace who took up his story, realised that he was an innocent guy, and took it basically forward until his case was reviewed and then his appeal accepted.
Tanita, have you got anything more that you'd like to sort of expand on that part of the story?
I think it's worth saying there that actually, although Andrew walked into the police station and, as you say, made that job very easy, very quickly soon after, he did then start to protest. Well, actually, that wasn't true. He wanted to recant his statement. He wasn't guilty, and he went to court pleading not guilty. So in the very early days, before there was even a conviction, Andrew had stood up and said, this is what happened, and actually I'm innocent. But unfortunately, the evidence presented to the jury brought them to the decision that he was still the person responsible. So, and then began the next 20 or so years of him trying to reverse that decision.
It is absolutely heartbreaking. It's truly tragic. And then another name enters, Sutcliffe. Who is he? Where's he come from? And how did he just suddenly appear in this story?
Well, Peter Sutcliffe was a former gravedigger in Bingley Cemetery. As a teenager, he got his sexual urges from handling corpses. Once he was sacked, he no longer had that availability. It's like a reverse David Fuller, who found a job in a mortuary and stopped being a killer. With Peter Sutcliffe's case, he then had to drive by the killer urge to achieve the satisfaction he was achieving previously with dead bodies. It's quite clear that Sutcliffe's offending occurred well before the Yorkshire Ripper series, and that's in at least two books I've previously had published. At the time, he was visiting his future wife, Sonia, who had a mental breakdown in London, and he's travelling down the M1 in order to see her. And her breakdown occurred just prior to Judith's murder. The method, which is very strong, indicates someone of his calibre. And in New Scotland Yard, the method index, there was a crime desk that all crimes within the United Kingdom were fed into what was called a method index. Sutcliffe in 1969 had been arrested in possession of a hammer in a red light district in Bradford. That was indexed in New Scotland Yard, going equipped with a hammer. Now, when Judith's murder occurred, and previously, 2 years previously in Derbyshire and in, I forget the other county, basically Jackie Ansel Lamb and Barbara Mayo were murdered in 1970. One of the instruments used was a hammer. So those two counties joined Staffordshire borders, and a new Scotland Yard Detective Chief Superintendent was appointed for Judith's murder. Now, when he went back to New Scotland Yard, he should have interrogated the method index on who carries a hammer, and Peter Sutcliffe's name should have come out of the system. It didn't.
So at what point did it then again? His name reappeared? Just in your book?
It didn't actually occur until July 1975 when Anna Regulski was attacked in Keighley in West Yorkshire, and two other women subsequently survived before Will McCann's murder. So there's a sequence of events all the way through from 1969 that West Yorkshire Police should have had Sutcliffe's name to the fore from when he was arrested for going equipped with a hammer. It wasn't. Had that happened, and had they taken the three attempted murders, including Tracy Brown's first-hand information, he was a local man, it would have been cleared up before Will McCann's murder.
Absolutely. Right, so with this story, I don't want to sort of give everything away to listeners, but if you could just explain, what are they going to get out of this book? You know, getting your hands on this book, how is it written? What type of a book is it?
Well, I think that Chris and I have done a great deal of research. And I mean, we have had a look under every stone and in every file that we could possibly get our hands on. So I think what the readers can expect is a very thorough interrogation of Judith, her life, her death, also Andrew Evans and the miscarriage of justice. And we do also have in the book, not to give too much away, but we have the interview between Andrew Evans and the police when he confesses to Judith's murder. And the readers can really see that play out as to how that went so wrong. I think it can't be taken for granted that Andrew Evans didn't have an appropriate adult with him to back him up. So you do kind of see this descent into this really awful time for Andrew Evans, and indeed off the back of this terrible crime that's happened to Judith. And I think that readers will get a glimpse of Sutcliffe's offending prior to when he becomes well known with the murders that he is very well connected to. I think it opens up that door of there was some offending prior to that. And even in the Byford report that was carried out after Sutcliffe was arrested, it was clearly stated that they believe, and the police believe, and the higher ups believe, that Sutcliffe was offending around the country on unaccompanied women. They make that really very clear. And so it seems quite shocking to us when we're putting this together that here is a prime example of somebody who fits all the different elements of a crime related to Sutcliffe, and yet has never fully been examined in this way.
And does the book have a clear, definitive ending? Or how open is it for the reader to draw their own conclusions?
Well, for me, I think the ending is very much that there is no time frame on justice. There is no such thing as an end date for when justice can be served. And any answers that can be provided, whether they be 30, 40, 50 years in the future, they should still be answered. There is still that... there is still the option for us to give Judith the ending that there is justice for her in some sense, or answers for those who do remember her.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's a real good food for thought there, and soundbite ending it. Thank you, Tanita. Really appreciate your time, and Chris as well. The book is called The Murder of Judith Roberts, and it's available on the Talk Radio Europe bookshop or via Amazon. Good morning, guys. Have enjoyed the rest of your day, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.